Hello, welcome back to The Road to Episode 9, my ongoing series where I chart the road to the release of Star Wars Episode 9 in December 2019. Yes, apparently in the last video I said 2017. No, Episode 9 is not coming out a month ago. It's come out in just under 2 years, in December 2019. And in this video I want to talk about some of the fallout from The Last Jedi. I want to get to that stuff, which I never really had time to in the period of the film having just come out and me going to see it 8 times. So there wasn't a lot of time for me, especially over Christmas, seeing family and so on, that I could sit down, or in this case stand up, and make these videos and talk about the talk of the filmmakers and the cast members about The Last Jedi once it had come out, and kind of the spoilers were out there. There was a great number of articles released on Entertainment Weekly's website where we had some Q&As with Rian Johnson, the director of The Last Jedi, talking about the choices and decisions he made with the film, which for some people who may have had an issue with The Last Jedi could see where he was coming from, whether they agreed with it or not. So in this video I'm going to talk about his kind of, not kind of defense, but explanations of where he went with the characters of Snoke, Luke, Leia, and maybe a couple of other things. So first of all, Supreme Leader Snoke, the character, and of course spoilers, the character who was introduced in The Force Awakens and was swiftly cut in half in The Last Jedi, and I think a lot of people were divided on that decision. Me, I was pretty split on it, but Snoke is a character that people have been, you know, not confused, well, confused, but also frustrated over, like why wasn't the backstory revealed, so on and so forth. So what Ryan had to say about Snoke is that when I was working on the character of Kylo, I came to a place where I thought the most interesting thing would be is to knock the shaky foundation out from underneath him at the beginning of this movie. By the end of this film, he's gone from being a wannabe Vader to someone who is standing on his own feet as a complex villain taking the reins. But then the question is, what place would Snoke have at the end of that? With, you know, Kylo taking his place as this, you know, fully fledged villain, basically. Ryan continues to say, that made me realize the most interesting thing is to eliminate that dynamic between the Emperor and pupil, so that all bets are off going into the next movie. That also led to the possibility of this dramatic turn in the middle, which could also be a really powerful connection point between Kylo and Rey. And then people are, you know, saying, well, he should have been someone, you know, that there should have been a reveal that he was someone that we already knew. His thoughts on that is that it would have stopped any of those scenes dead cold if he had stopped and given a 30-second speech about how he's Darth Plagueis. It doesn't matter to Rey. If he had done that, Rey would have blinked and said, "Who?" and the scene would have just gone on. And then he quickly added, "And I'm not saying that he is Darth Plagueis." So, and I really agree with that. You know, I think that it was so good for Kylo to, again, just cut that thing, you know, completely in half, nip it in the bud, get rid of Snoke, and, you know, place himself firmly as the ruler of the galaxy as far as evil's concerned. It's something that, you know, Darth Vader, who he idolizes so clearly, never did. Vader was never able to do that. I mean, he did do it in a sense right at the last minute, but, you know, Darth Vader, you know, you would have thought if you were going to have this ruler of the galaxy, he would have, you know, he would have snuffed the Emperor out long before the original trilogy started. But the Darth Vader was always subservient to the Emperor. So Kylo Ren is breaking away from that mold. You know, let the past die. You know, it's moving forward in a way and doing something we've never seen before. Again, people go on about how, you know, The Force Awakens was so predictable, and then something like this happens and people still don't like it. But I think that another great point is that it would be a really powerful connection point between Kylo and Rey. You know, that's something she's never going to forget. You know, that he basically saved her life. You know, she was about to, well, I guess he was saving her life from himself. He was the one who was tasked with killing her, but still, you know, she would have probably died in that room if Kylo hadn't done what he did. But then there's the question of why he did what he did. And again, I love that scene when she realizes that he didn't kill Snoke to kind of go to the good side. He killed Snoke to further his path to the dark. And one more thing that isn't really like a big topic, but nevertheless something that people talked about, is Captain Phasma, and why, you know, she was killed, allegedly, maybe, and also the visual kind of frame that we got with Phasma getting smacked in the face by Finn, and the image of her eye coming through the helmet. And he said that it seemed like a really striking thing to just glimpse the humanity behind it. Originally we were like, should it be kind of monstrous? What should be behind there? But actually it was Daisy Ridley who said that it should be just Gwendolyn's beautiful piercing eye. Just this perfect blue eye behind the metal monster, and I loved that image. So that was kind of cool that Daisy Ridley kind of influenced that decision. I thought it was a really memorable moment in that sequence where we got to see the eye of Captain Phasma. I'm not sure how it would have played if her whole helmet had come off, but just that kind of image of the eye kind of broken off was really cool to me. So yeah, he felt that there was something more disturbing in revealing beauty beneath the mask rather than ugliness. Though there has been talk by people that she hadn't died because, you know, we see her fall down and go through flames, but again, the Supremacy ship is like as big as a city. So she could have fallen on some kind of metal pylon maybe, found a ship and flown off, and we'll see her again in the 9th one, you know, all charred and maybe, I don't know, who knows. I mean, it pretty much was insinuated that she was dead in The Force Awakens. She was apparently thrown in a trash compactor on a planet that was about to implode in a few minutes, so God knows how she escaped from that. It would almost be kind of funny if she did turn up in episode 9. We'll leave Luke until the end of the video because that's kind of a hot topic, but it's probably the most debated aspect of the film. Leia. Now Ryan said that it was actually Kathleen Kennedy's idea for Leia to do what she did in The Last Jedi, and the people who have an issue with Kathleen Kennedy probably will be lapping up that fact. And Ryan says that Kathleen Kennedy, she kept asking, Leia's a Skywalker. Luke gave her this speech in Jedi and told her basically, you have this potential too, you have that power too. So it really seemed to me it would be a really emotional, an emotionally impactful thing to see her use it in the film. Ryan says, I like the idea that it would be an instinctual thing, referencing Leia being out in space and surviving, basically, by using the Force. This would be more like stories you hear about parents of toddlers who get caught under cars and they get Hulk-like strength and lift the car up. That idea of that just pure survival instinct, adrenaline basically, but framed through the prism of the Force. And again, she's a Skywalker. He continues to say it would be something in these final moments to show that she's not done with the fight. And like a drowning person pulling herself back, that's how it manifests itself for the first time in her in such a big way. Now, I'm not going to try and defend the Leia spacewalk or the skywalk. You know, people hate it, people don't like it, people are embarrassed by it, you know, it's cringeworthy, you know, that's fine. If that's the way you view it, that's the way you view it. I'm not going to try and defend it. I loved it personally. Has it been as good, the subsequent viewings, as the first time? No, because that shock and that kind of amazement you know, wears off once I know what's going to happen, but I still think it's a very powerful scene, and I love the fact we got to see Leia do something incredible with the Force we'd never seen before. And people saying, well, she had no training. Look, number one, she's a Skywalker. Done and done. You know, it's like the family that is so strong in the Force that literally a member was born through it, you know. That's all you need to know. 2, she's fucking Leia, she's a badass, and 3, it's a movie. You know, it's fantasy. Anyway, so that was his kind of little discussion on that moment with Leia and so on. Although this was, you know, I think this was around just after the film had been screened for critics, so the shitstorm of fan reaction hadn't happened yet. Though he hasn't really commented on that too much. Although today, actually, I saw a tweet someone made about Paddington. You know, in reference to the new film, and Rian Johnson replied to the tweet saying, "Just look forward to the tweet saying #NotMyPaddington," which kind of slyly references the big kind of #NotMyLuke campaign on social media, which ties in very neatly to the final point or the final topic of conversation for this video, and that is Rian Johnson and Mark Hamill's thoughts on Luke Skywalker in The Last Jedi. So, Luke dying. Ryan says, I had huge hesitance. I was terrified. It was a growing sense of dread that when I realized this was going to make sense in this chapter. It was not like I wrote the script and just dropped it on the desk of Lucasfilm. It was very important to me that I was collaborating with the folks at Lucasfilm from the word go. I moved to San Francisco for a few months and would go in a few times a week to keep them up to date spewing my ideas out, especially the big ones. Mark Hamill, who was also at this kind of Q&A event, said, well, I'm still in denial. I just think he transported somewhere else. The first thing I said was, can't you wait and just do this in episode 9? Which I think is hilarious. And, you know, he's joking around about this thing. And then there's been that whole kind of Mark Hamill hates The Last Jedi, which I'm going to talk about in a whole separate video. And then he also says, I think that Rian Johnson says, I think the hero's journey of Luke Skywalker concluded in Return of the Jedi. This trilogy is the hero's journey of Rey and Finn and Poe. The ongoing story of Luke is one that has to play in tandem with that of Rey, which is another thing that I agree with. You know, yeah, it would have been great to see Luke kind of turn up and do all this crazy shit and kind of, you know, be this incredible god-level hero, but then where does that leave the bad guys in the film who need to, you know, be strong, basically? If you're looking at it from a storytelling perspective, you know, for the 9th film to make sense, the bad guys still need to be this big looming presence for the good guys to kind of go up against in kind of an underdog fashion to take them down and win and save the galaxy and all that kind of stuff. If you have this kind of, you know, ridiculous, powerful Jedi Luke Skywalker there to just kind of wave his hand and just destroy everyone, then there's no weight, there's no dramatic weight. Just, oh, well, you can just, you know, you can kill them all, you know, in episode 9 just with a flick of his finger. It doesn't work like that, you know. You could do it and it would be cool, but I mean, it just wouldn't sustain a 2-hour movie of any kind of tension. And for me, you know, Luke, one of my favorite characters ever, my favorite Star Wars character right next to Yoda. You know, did I want to see him die? No, but did I love it? Yes, because it was such a cool, fitting ending, and an unexpected ending to his character too. And look, I did my whole 2-hour review where I go in depth into my thoughts on the whole thing, and it hasn't really changed. And one thing I should mention, because I haven't really talked about it in this series, is if anyone is a fan of wrestling or follows it, one of the guys I follow in the wrestling world is Chris Jericho. And I have kind of mixed feelings on Chris Jericho. I've been a big fan of him for almost 20 years now, but he did a podcast about Star Wars, and he had a big kind of hang-up on the whole Luke thing. Even Kevin Smith, where his biggest hang-up on The Last Jedi was that, you know, Luke didn't turn up for real at the end on Crate. You know, and that kind of, and they both, Kevin Smith and Chris Jericho, were like, we saw the X-Wing, you know, he should have lifted the X-Wing out of the water. Now, I thought that when I first saw the film too, but it's a great bit of misdirection. Because when the Battle of Crate was going on, and you know, oh, we're losing and stuff, and oh, the distress signal's been unnoticed, I was thinking, Luke is going to swoop in his X-Wing, isn't he? He's going to blow all this shit up, it's going to be fucking awesome, I can't wait. But it didn't happen that way. And if you read the visual dictionary of The Last Jedi, the hut that Luke stays in, his home on the island of Acto, the metal door is actually from his X-Wing. He salvaged it from that. So in that sense, part of his X-Wing is missing, and another sense has been, you know, in the water. But also just from a story perspective, I find it more fitting that he wasn't able to be there in person. He had to do something different. And it was just something different for us to see. Anyway, so Chris Jericho on his podcast was you know, he pretty much really enjoyed the film, but he really didn't like that Luke wasn't there for real. He said that it accomplished nothing. Luke projecting himself to Crate, just, you know, it just didn't do anything. It would have been great if he was there and he used the Force and made the walkers shoot themselves and blew them all up and stuff. That's what he wanted to see Luke be that kind of badass Jedi, to get a proper Jedi moment. And I thought, all right, I'll bite. So I tweeted to Chris Jericho. I sent a couple of tweets, and I was like, well, you know, and I guess I can just find them on my phone. Okay, for some reason my phone never really shows me all of my tweets, which is really weird. But basically, I replied to Chris Jericho and I said, to say that he accomplished nothing is missing the point completely. And also, people seem to forget what Yoda said in Empire Strikes Back. You know, a Jedi's strength comes from knowledge and defense, never from attack. You know, that idea of being a pacifist, basically, which, you know, the Jedi never really adhere to because their hand is always forced. But that idea, that core belief of a Jedi is to only act out of defense. And what Luke does on Crate is, you know, technically, you know, if you want, well, arguably, the most Jedi moment we've ever seen in a Star Wars movie, pretty much. Well, I guess you can kind of look at maybe Obi-Wan sacrificing himself on the Death Star, but he still fought Vader. You know, Luke goes out there and he literally doesn't touch anything and accomplishes so much, you know, without using violence. And not that it's making a big anti-violence message, but I loved how that was a part of it, you know, that he basically accomplished so much by really not doing anything physically. And it was more about the idea of it. And so I made all these points, and, you know, Chris Jericho, he's known to be a bit of a dick on Twitter sometimes. He'll kind of call fans, you know, shitheads or whatever if they disagree with him. And he replied and said, "Well said, points taken." You know, and it's just so funny that the only time I've kind of argued a point about The Last Jedi and someone said, "Oh, you actually have a point there, fair enough," was Chris Jericho, of all people. I mean, he's the one and only person who I've kind of said to them, "Well, this is kind of why it makes sense," and they go, "Oh yeah, that's true." No one's really said, if I try and explain myself, or not myself, but if I try to explain my reasoning behind some of the things and how I read The Last Jedi, you know, people will just dismiss it, you know, which is fine. People have their own opinions and so on. But I found that funny anyway. So that was kind of Ryan's take on it and so on. And there's so much that has kind of come out in terms of Ryan talking about the film, which is really interesting. I'll probably talk more about that in future videos and so on and so forth. And yeah, so I guess I'll leave it there. And people who are not fans of Rian Johnson and think that he ruined Star Wars, I don't know why you're watching the video this far in, because you're probably pulling your hair out at me being, you know, on board with all of his decisions. But there we go. That was my thoughts. Not really my thoughts, we're kind of just talking about what he said about it, but because I pretty much agree, so in that sense I don't really have much to add myself. But I like to kind of cover these things, and I find them interesting. So thank you for watching, stay tuned for the next one, and I'll see you then.